Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. After all your endless wandering across the internet, you've finally arrived, hopefully ready to drift off peacefully with today's story. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and how late it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide our listeners reach. And if you enjoy these videos, subscribing would mean a lot. Now, let's begin. The sun had barely begun to rise over the smoke-choked horizon of Troy, casting long, trembling shadows across the shattered walls and the smouldering remains of once proud towers. Ash drifted lazily on the wind, coating the broken streets and the bodies strewn across the battlefield like a thin, mournful veil. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, stood atop a ruined gate, his armor dulled and scratched from the relentless campaign, the leather straps of his sandals stiff from weeks of blood, dust, and salt water. Around him, the chaos of victory lingered in sharp contrast to the eerie silence of a city that had once sung with life. The cries of women and children long gone, the clatter of swords replaced by the occasional groan of the wounded, and the distant murmur of his own soldiers, weary, triumphant, yet hollow-eyed, as if the ghosts of their foes still haunted their footsteps. Yet in the midst of ruin, Odysseus felt that familiar spark of cunning and purpose, a flicker of thought that had guided him through labyrinths of both human folly and divine caprice. The tale of the Trojan Horse had spread even before its wooden belly was wheeled through the gates. Temptation, ingenuity, and the subtle orchestration of fear and hope had allowed his small band of men to infiltrate Troy under the guise of a gift, hiding within planks and shadow, hearts pounding, breathing shallow, minds whirling with the knowledge that a single misstep could doom them all. He remembered the laughter of his companions, muffled behind the carved wood, the shuffling of armor, the whispered prayers to Athena, and the sharp intake of breath as the unsuspecting Trojans celebrated what they believed was the end of war. Then the trap was sprung, the soldiers emerged, swords drawn, and chaos erupted like a storm finally unbound. Flames licked the sky, screams tore through the night, and Odysseus, ever the strategist, moved through the turmoil with a calm born of absolute certainty, directing men, subduing leaders, and ensuring the capture of prisoners for negotiation, reward, or, when necessary, execution. The aftermath was sobering. Temples lay desecrated, treasures looted, families torn asunder. Yet even in triumph, Odysseus knew that war's end was only the beginning of consequence. Allies and enemies alike watched, their eyes measuring courage, cunning, and cruelty, the delicate balance of fear and respect that would define his journey home and the stories told about him for generations. Among the chaos, he found brief moments of quiet reflection. The dead and dying were reminders not only of human fragility but of the responsibility that accompanied survival and victory. Each choice carried weight, each command etched in memory, each life spared or lost a testament to both skill and the capricious hand of the gods. Odysseus felt the pull of home stronger than the lust for plunder or glory. Ithaca, distant and imagined across endless waves, became a beacon in his mind, a vision of hearth, of familiar hills, olive groves, and the sound of gentle waves lapping against the rocky shore. Yet the gods, as always, were temperamental. Athena's guidance whispered in dreams, subtle and cryptic, reminding him that the path home would be neither swift nor safe. Poseidon's wrath, simmering and unseen, promised storms, monsters, and trials that would test mind, body, and soul. The men, though loyal, were weary and temperamental, their spirits frayed by hunger, grief, and the haunting memory of war. He would need every ounce of cunning, every lesson learned in both council chambers and battlefield blood, to navigate the labyrinth of the seas, islands, and unseen perils that lay ahead. As dawn broke fully, illuminating the twisted remnants of Troy, Odysseus gathered his men, their eyes reflecting exhaustion, relief, and a strange flicker of anticipation. Words were few, strategy, observation, and subtle signals guided them as they prepared to leave the city that had defined so much of their lives and ambitions. Horses were mounted, ships readied along the shore, and provisions gathered with the care of those who knew that survival demanded foresight. Even as the first oars cut through the Mediterranean waters, Odysseus felt the weight of history pressing on him. The glory of victory tempered by the shadow of loss, the thrill of cunning tempered by the knowledge of mortality, and the relentless pull of destiny that would not allow rest until the shores of Ithaca rose once more beneath his eyes. Each wave that struck the hull of the ships seemed to murmur both warning and promise, carrying him away from Troy but closer to the trials, wonders, and heartbreaks that would define the long journey home. And so, as the city faded into the haze behind him, Odysseus began to chart a course not only across the waters but across fate itself, a journey that would test wisdom, courage, and endurance in ways no mortal could foresee, yet demand from him everything a hero could give. The sea stretched before them like a vast sheet of silver, catching the first blush of sunlight as Odysseus' fleet of battered ships cut through the calm waters. The air smelled of salt and smoke, mingling memories of Troy with the tangible reality of the journey ahead. Men, still bruised and weary from battle, worked quietly, checking rigging, stacking provisions, and tending to wounds, each action carried out with a precision born of necessity. Some stared across the waves in silence, eyes reflecting sorrow, triumph, or the haunting images of friends lost in the chaos of the Trojan conflict. Odysseus, standing at the prow of his flagship, felt the weight of leadership pressing upon him. Victory had been won, yet triumph was fleeting, and the uncertainty of the journey ahead loomed larger than any battlefield. He spoke rarely, for his voice carried authority, but each word was measured, layered with strategy, counsel, and sometimes the faintest humor to lighten the heaviness in the hearts of his men. "Keep your minds sharp," he said, voice low but carrying, "and your oars steady. The sea is generous and cruel alike. We may find bounty, but we may also find trial." The men exchanged glances, some drawing comfort, others skeptical, yet all trusted him, for they had seen his cunning turn the tide of war when brute force alone would have failed. As they sailed, Odysseus reflected on the cost of Troy's fall. Cities destroyed, families broken, and alliances strained by both necessity and ambition. Even the spoils of war were tinged with grief, gold and treasures that seemed hollow in the absence of those who had not survived to see them claimed. Nights were quiet, punctuated only by the gentle slap of waves against hulls and the occasional murmur of conversation, laughter hesitant and fragile. Around fires lit on deck, men shared stories, some of courage, some of folly, some of loved ones left behind, never to be seen again. Odysseus listened, contributing when necessary, offering guidance or gentle correction, understanding that morale depended not only on provisions and strategy but on the strength of shared purpose and the subtle weaving of trust. Along the voyage, the distant cries of gulls and the whisper of wind over water became constant companions, a rhythm both soothing and ominous. Athena's presence, subtle as a shadow at dawn, reminded him that his path was watched and shaped by powers beyond human comprehension. He prayed silently for guidance, aware that cleverness alone would not suffice. The favor of the gods was as vital as skill with bow, sword, or oar. Days passed, each blending into the next as the horizon remained endless and the sea capricious. Islands appeared as distant shapes, sometimes promising respite, sometimes hiding danger, and each encounter became a test of vigilance, judgment, and leadership. Odysseus' mind, always alert, considered not only immediate strategy but the larger web of consequences. The loyalty of men, the unknown challenges ahead, and the ever-present possibility of divine intervention, whether benevolent or wrathful. On one quiet evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the sea in molten gold, he spoke to his closest companions, Menelaus and Eurylochus, words carrying both reflection and intent. "We have won what mortals seldom do, yet the sea has its own laws. Each choice we make echoes far beyond our sight. We must be cunning, patient, and steadfast, for the road to Ithaca is longer than any war, and its trials will test more than arms, they will test heart and mind alike." The men nodded, understanding both the literal and symbolic weight of the journey ahead. They ate quietly, shared stories of home, and allowed themselves brief moments of humor, a fleeting reprieve from the grim reality of exile from familiar shores. As night fell, the stars reflected off the water like countless tiny lanterns guiding their way. Odysseus stood at the prow once more, the wind tugging at his cloak, the salt spray stinging his eyes, and felt the first true taste of longing, not for victory, not for glory, but for Ithaca, the olive groves, the hills, the home he had fought to protect and the family he had yet to reunite with. Somewhere, across the waters, Poseidon's anger brewed, invisible yet undeniable, and the first hints of future storms whispered across the waves. Yet Odysseus, steady and resolute, felt the spark of determination, the blend of wisdom and cunning that had carried him through Troy and would, he vowed, carry him home. Each oar stroke, each gust of wind, each decision made in silence or counsel, became a thread in the intricate tapestry of the journey. The sea, endless and unpredictable, awaited them with all its promise and peril, and Odysseus knew that the true test of his heroism was just beginning, a test that would demand more than courage, more than strength, it would demand the full measure of mind, heart, and soul. The sun rose higher, casting a warm, golden glow over the rolling waves as Odysseus' fleet sailed steadily westward, the rhythmic splash of oars marking time like the heartbeat of a great, living creature. The men, still bearing the bruises and fatigue of Troy, murmured quietly among themselves, some whispering prayers, some recounting memories of home, and some watching the horizon with a cautious curiosity. It was then that the green outline of a distant shore emerged, hills rising gently above the waves, forests thick with pine and oak, and the glint of small settlements along the water's edge. "Cicones," Odysseus said, pointing toward the land, his eyes sharp, mind already weighing options. "We make landfall, not for conquest alone, but for supplies, for rest, and to measure our strength before the sea tests us again." The ships drew closer, the rhythmic creak of hulls mingling with the cries of seabirds circling overhead. Upon landing, the men disembarked cautiously, weapons at the ready, yet the settlement seemed peaceful, inhabitants engaged in daily labor, tending flocks, weaving baskets, and carrying water from nearby streams. For a brief moment, relief softened the tension in Odysseus' chest, a fleeting pause between the chaos of Troy and the trials yet to come. Yet, as ever, caution was the hero's companion. Odysseus sent scouts ahead, observing the movement of the Cicones, noting the organization of their forces, the possible presence of warriors, and the natural terrain that could aid or hinder a sudden skirmish. It was in these moments that he felt the subtle thrill of strategy, the delicate dance of observation, anticipation, and the application of cunning to unknown variables. The initial encounter was deceptively peaceful. The Cicones welcomed them with cautious smiles and gestures of hospitality, sharing bread, fresh water, and local fruits. The men laughed, ate, and allowed themselves brief moments of camaraderie, the memory of Troy's devastation still vivid yet momentarily softened by a sense of safety. Yet safety, Odysseus knew, was often the precursor to danger. The subtle tension in the air was a reminder that even minor missteps could escalate into conflict. It was not long before the Cicones warriors, called from villages inland, emerged with shields gleaming in the sunlight and spears sharp, signaling that the apparent hospitality masked a readiness for defense. The first clash was swift and chaotic, the men of Odysseus caught between surprise and resolve, their skills tested in ways familiar from Troy yet tempered by exhaustion and unfamiliar terrain. Odysseus moved among them with the calm authority of a seasoned leader, directing lines, signaling retreats, and exploiting weak points in the enemy formation. The initial skirmish favored the Greeks, their discipline and coordination giving them the edge against the uncoordinated yet determined Cicones. Victory, however, was not absolute. Reinforcements arrived from the hills, and the tide of battle shifted, forcing Odysseus to order a strategic withdrawal. Men scrambled back to the ships, shields clanging, spears thrown, and the air filled with the cries of the wounded, the clash of metal, and the thrum of adrenaline. It was a lesson, immediate and stark. Victory without caution invited loss. Those who had allowed hubris to guide their actions learned the cost, and Odysseus, patient yet resolute, ensured order was restored, discipline reinforced, and retreat conducted with precision. As the fleet departed, the Cicones' cries fading behind them, Odysseus reflected on the fragile balance between triumph and disaster. Even a minor engagement held lessons for the journey ahead. Vigilance was constant, discipline was essential, and the unpredictable nature of both man and terrain required a mind as sharp as any sword. The men, shaken but alive, tended to their wounded and shared quiet laughter at the absurdities of battle, the tension momentarily eased by shared relief. Odysseus, standing at the prow once more, felt the sea stretch endlessly before him, its surface reflecting the afternoon sun in a glittering expanse. The wind carried both the scent of distant lands and the silent warnings of what awaited beyond. Temptations, monsters, storms, and divine whims that would test the very core of courage and cunning. And so, the journey continued, each wave carrying them further from Troy and closer to both the wonders and dangers that would define the epic path of home. A path that demanded not only skill and bravery but wisdom, patience, and the ever-present cunning of Odysseus. The horizon shimmered with heat as the fleet of Odysseus drifted westward, the rhythmic creak of oars and the soft splash of water blending with the cries of gulls overhead. The men, weary from the skirmish with the Cicones, settled into a rhythm, repairing sails, tending to minor wounds, and murmuring quietly among themselves about home, glory, and the relentless sea that both carried and threatened them. Odysseus stood at the prow, eyes scanning the distant shores that rose slowly from the morning haze. The land ahead was strange, unfamiliar, a gentle curve of coast, low hills clothed in verdant vegetation, and the faint glimmer of smoke curling from hidden groves. "We approach the Lotus Eaters," he warned, voice calm yet carrying an undertone of caution. "Here, the dangers are subtle, not swords or spears, but the soft chains of forgetfulness and temptation. Keep your minds sharp, for the enemy may not appear in battle, yet its grip is no less strong." As they landed, the air carried a sweet, cloying fragrance, a perfume of flowers and fruits that clung to the skin and drifted into the lungs like a gentle intoxication. The Lotus Eaters themselves were quiet, their movements languid, their eyes half-lidded, smiles soft and distant. They offered fruit and flowers to the weary men, gestures of hospitality tinged with the strange lethargy of those who had surrendered to indulgence and forgetfulness. At first, some of Odysseus' men hesitated, smiles touching lips, eyes glinting with curiosity and fatigue. A single taste of the lotus fruit, however, brought an immediate transformation: lightness, a sense of drifting away from cares, memories of home fading into the haze, replaced by a languid joy that dulled thought and dulls vigilance. Alarmed, Odysseus moved quickly, his voice sharp, commanding attention. "Do not yield," he called, pulling men away from the seductive plants. "Remember Ithaca, your families, the oaths you swore. This paradise is a trap, a sweetness that steals your mind as surely as a blade steals life." Despite his warnings, several men succumbed to the lotus, wandering toward the groves with vacant eyes, murmuring soft contentment, and heeding of commands, oblivious to both danger and duty. Odysseus' heart tightened, but his resolve hardened. He seized those he could, dragging them back to the ships, binding their hands when persuasion failed, and speaking in measured tones that reminded them of the trials already endured and the home that awaited beyond the horizon. "We are bound by honor, by oaths, and by the gods," he said, eyes fierce yet steady. "Forget not who you are, or the consequences of yielding to ease. The sea demands more than idle pleasure. It demands vigilance, courage, and cunning." The lesson was swift and unforgiving. Those who had tasted the lotus regained awareness only with effort and the firm guidance of Odysseus, their minds clearing like mist lifting from a sun-drenched plain. They returned to their stations aboard the ships, chastened, aware that even subtle indulgences could be more perilous than open conflict, and that the journey home required constant awareness of both temptation and duty. As the fleet pulled away, the sweet scent of the lotus lingering faintly in the wind, Odysseus surveyed the waves, the glimmer of distant horizons, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow on the water. The island, beautiful and serene as it had seemed, receded behind them, a stark reminder that danger often came not with the clash of swords but with whispers of comfort and the allure of forgetfulness. Silence settled over the ships, broken only by the steady rhythm of oars, the occasional sigh of wind in the sails, and the quiet murmur of men reflecting on the lesson learned: that the mind, as much as the body, could be ensnared, and that only vigilance, cunning, and steadfast purpose could carry them safely toward the shores of Ithaca. Each man now knew, in the marrow of his bones, that the journey ahead would test not only courage and skill but discipline of the heart and mind, and that the true voyage of Odysseus had only begun, a path winding through temptation, danger, and the ever-watchful eyes of both gods and fate. The sea stretched wide and unbroken, waves sparkling like shattered glass beneath the relentless sun as Odysseus' fleet continued westward, the wind tugging at sails and the spray stinging faces weary from both sun and salt. The men had regained a cautious rhythm, rowing, tending to provisions, and sharing stories of home that lingered on the edges of their minds. Yet Odysseus remained vigilant, senses attuned to the subtle shifts of wind, current, and horizon. When land finally rose before them, rugged and untamed, cliffs and rocky outcrops jutted sharply from the shore, and a strange silence hung over the beaches, broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the faint rush of waves. "Cyclopes," Odysseus whispered to his companions, his voice low yet carrying the gravity of warning. "Here dwell giants of immense strength, creatures of savagery and isolation. Approach with care, for they heed neither law, nor counsel, nor the pleas of mortals." With the fleet anchored in a secluded cove, Odysseus led a small party inland, moving with quiet precision, surveying the land for signs of habitation. Soon, the towering figure of Polyphemus became visible, a giant among the hills, his eye glinting with the dim light of curiosity and suspicion. The men froze, hearts pounding, aware that even the slightest misstep could spell doom. Yet Odysseus, ever cunning, kept his composure, weighing options, envisioning the contours of the encounter, and recognizing that survival demanded both wit and restraint. They entered the cavern of the Cyclops, laden with food, water, and small gifts intended as gestures of peace. The massive doorway swallowed them in shadow, and the air was thick with the scent of livestock, earth, and smoke. Polyphemus' arrival was sudden and overwhelming. The giant's voice rumbled like distant thunder, questioning, accusing, and striking terror into the hearts of men accustomed to the steppe, the sea, and the battlefield alike. Odysseus, bowing with deceptive humility, spoke first, offering words of respect and diplomacy, while observing the giant's reactions, noting the sway of muscle, the cadence of speech, and the flicker of intelligence behind the singular eye. Polyphemus, though brutish, revealed a cunning of his own, questioning the strangers, testing their resolve, and demonstrating a capacity for violence that made hesitation lethal. The men were trapped, yet Odysseus' mind raced with stratagems. He devised a plan of both subtlety and daring, a stake to blind the monster, a precise sequence of deception, and the use of wine to dull the Cyclops' senses. Each step required coordination, nerve, and unflinching courage from men already tested by war, temptation, and the sea. The night was filled with tense preparation. The stakes were sharpened, fires arranged to provide cover and light, and small rations consumed to maintain energy. Odysseus' voice cut through fear, steady and inspiring, reminding the men of both duty and cunning. "Patience, precision, and boldness," he murmured. "These are our weapons as much as spear or sword." When the moment came, the plan unfolded with terrifying precision. The Cyclops, drunk and distracted, was struck blind, his roars of pain echoing through the cavern like thunder over the plains. The men clung to ropes and animals, executing the escape that Odysseus had envisioned, hearts racing, breath ragged, yet minds clear with the clarity born of survival and cleverness. As dawn crept over the jagged cliffs, Odysseus stood upon a ridge overlooking the sea, watching Polyphemus' roars fade with distance, a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering fear coursing through him. The men, alive but shaken, began their return to the ships, each step a testament to courage, discipline, and the ingenuity that marked the leader who had guided them through Troy, the Cicones, the Lotus Eaters, and now the very jaws of a monster. Yet even in victory, Odysseus knew the consequences of hubris. He could not resist a final, taunting proclamation to Polyphemus, a decision that would carry the wrath of Poseidon, god of the sea, and ensure that the journey ahead would be fraught with storms, peril, and divine retribution. The sun rose over restless waters, spilling molten gold across the sea as Odysseus' ships drifted away from the jagged cliffs where Polyphemus' roars still echoed faintly, mingling with the crash of waves and the cries of gulls circling overhead. The men rowed in silence, muscles aching, hearts pounding from both exertion and lingering fear, while the salt spray stung eyes and reminded them that the sea was no refuge, only a shifting stage for new trials. Odysseus, standing at the prow of the lead ship, eyes sharp and calculating, felt a weight settle over him, not from exhaustion or relief, but from the knowledge that the cunning display against the Cyclops had not gone unnoticed by the gods. Poseidon's wrath, though unseen, was a tangible presence, a tremor beneath the waves that foreshadowed storms, shipwrecks, and trials yet to come. The men sensed it too, the subtle change in the wind, the inexplicable chill in the air, the uneasy silence that had replaced the tentative camaraderie of the previous night. Despite their fear, Odysseus addressed them with calm authority, speaking words that blended reassurance with the steely edge of command. "We have survived a monster that could crush us as easily as a child's plaything. Remember that cunning, courage, and discipline carried us through. But the sea, like the gods, is patient. It waits to test us again, and we must be ready, for fortune favors the prepared and punishes the reckless." Days passed, the men navigating the open water, and the consequences of their actions began to ripple outward. The blinding of Polyphemus was more than a triumph. It was a provocation, a mark that would invoke Poseidon's fury. Odysseus' decision to taunt the Cyclops, revealing his name and lineage, had been an act of pride as much as cleverness, a double-edged sword that would ripple through time, shaping storms and misfortune. Already, whispers among the crew reflected unease. Some questioned the wisdom of revealing themselves, while others admired the daring of their leader. Odysseus, ever attuned to both morale and perception, moved among them, balancing guidance with empathy, listening to doubts and redirecting fear into focus. At night, Beneath a canopy of stars reflected in the restless water, he thought of Ithaca, of Penelope, and of the life that waited beyond the trials of sea and monster. His thoughts were interrupted only by the distant rumble of thunder and the faint spray of rain on the sails, a reminder that the gods watched, and that every choice carried consequence. One evening, a storm arose without warning. Dark clouds gathered like a shroud, winds tore at sails, and waves struck the hulls with the force of battering rams. The men fought with every ounce of strength, oars digging deep, voices shouting, commands slicing through the roar of nature. Odysseus moved among them, directing, encouraging, and at times physically assisting in the heaving and securing of rigging. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the faces of men tense with fear, resolve, and determination. Amid the chaos, the lessons of the Cyclops were evident. Courage without cunning would not suffice, strength alone could not guarantee survival, and the sea demanded constant attention, vigilance, and unity. The storm passed, leaving broken sails, bruised bodies, and a renewed sense of awe and respect for the forces that governed both land and sea. Odysseus gathered the men, offering both counsel and reflection. We have learned that action carries consequence, and that pride, though tempting, may invite wrath beyond mortal control. Let us be vigilant, clever, and steadfast, for the road ahead is long, and the gods' eyes are ever upon us. In the days that followed, the fleet pressed onward, navigating with careful attention to wind, current, and horizon. Each island, each distant shape, was approached with suspicion and strategy. The memory of Polyphemus lingered like a shadow, both a testament to ingenuity and a warning of hubris. Conversations among the men shifted from tales of heroism to careful analysis of choices, of survival, and of the thin line between triumph and disaster. Odysseus himself remained ever watchful, balancing foresight with adaptability, guiding his crew through both immediate and long-term perils. And so, the journey continued, each wave carrying them further from Troy, each horizon promising new trials, and each decision echoing the intricate dance between human cunning, divine will, and the unpredictable fury of the natural world, shaping the epic path that would define the legend of Odysseus and the enduring saga of his voyage home. The horizon stretched like a silver ribbon under the midday sun, waves glinting with restless energy as Odysseus' fleet pressed onward, their hulls slicing through the foam with steady determination. Though the sea seemed calm, a subtle tension lingered among the men, a whispering unease that spoke of storms yet to come, of challenges hidden beyond the visible horizon, and of the gods' unseen hands shaping each moment of their voyage. Odysseus stood at the prow of the lead ship, eyes scanning the distant sky, mind weighing possibilities and devising strategies. Ahead lay an island unlike any before, crowned with cliffs and forests, its jagged peaks silhouetted against the clouds, giving it an aura of mystery both inviting and dangerous. "That is Aeolia," he murmured, voice carrying over the wind, "the home of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Here, we may find guidance, or new trials. Approach with respect, for the whims of wind and favor of gods are not to be taken lightly." As the ships drew near, the men noticed the unusual calm in the air. No gull cried overhead, no wave broke with its usual rhythm. The silence was almost sacred, a prelude to wonder or warning. On the shore, Aeolus awaited, regal and enigmatic, surrounded by attendants who carried baskets and vessels, their faces calm, expressions unreadable. Odysseus and a small party approached, shields lowered in gesture of peace, offering gifts of silver and bronze, crafted with care from Troy's spoils. Aeolus received them graciously, his eyes glinting with intelligence and amusement. "Odysseus of Ithaca," he said, voice like wind through reeds, "I know of your cunning, your journey, and the storms that pursue you. Take from me a gift that may ease your voyage, the winds, bound and contained, to speed your journey home. But heed this, trust is fragile, and temptation may undo even the wisest plans." Aeolus presented a great leather bag, its surface polished and stitched with careful precision. "Inside lie all winds, save the one that shall guide you to Ithaca. Guard it well, for curiosity and folly can undo the most prudent of men." With gratitude and careful reverence, Odysseus accepted the gift, returning to the ships with the bag secured below deck. The men marveled at its weight and mystery, some whispering in awe, others suspicious of unseen peril. 4 days, the west wind filled their sails, pushing them swiftly across the sea. The ships seemed to fly over the water, the horizon approaching faster than ever before. Spirits lifted, laughter returned, and tales of home and family once again filled the air, buoyed by the sense that the journey's end might finally be within reach. Yet the lesson of vigilance lingered. Odysseus, aware of human nature as much as divine favor, kept a watchful eye. He knew the allure of curiosity, the temptation to peer into forbidden knowledge, and the impatience that often leads to ruin. The crew, for all their loyalty, were mortal, and mortal minds are seldom disciplined in the face of wonder. One night, as the fleet slept beneath a sky studded with stars, murmuring waves lapping against hulls, the men's curiosity overcame caution. Whispers of what might lie within floated below deck, and a single hand pried at the leather fastenings. A gasp, a rustle, and the bag of winds was opened. At once, the bound forces erupted in fury, a torrent of gales and whirlwinds that tore sails, snapped rigging, and hurled men across the decks. Waves rose like mountains, each crash echoing the wrath of airless and the punishment for mortal folly. Odysseus barked orders, moving like a conductor amidst chaos, directing men, righting overturned boats, and using all his cunning to contain the disaster. Even so, the ships were torn from their path, driven backward, circling far from Ithaca, the west wind lost to the storm. As dawn broke over a battered, sodden fleet, Odysseus surveyed the damage and the faces of his exhausted men. Anger, fear, and remorse mingled in their eyes, and he felt the bitter taste of frustration. Yet beneath it lay a glimmer of lesson. The gods' gifts are fragile, human curiosity and impatience can undo even the cleverest plans, and mastery of both mind and circumstance is essential to survival. With patient guidance, he restored order, patched sails, reassured the men, and charted a new course. The storm had passed, leaving behind both ruin and revelation. Each wave, each gust, each ripple of the sea reminded Odysseus that the path to home would be unpredictable, shaped as much by the whims of gods as by mortal choice, and that cleverness alone, without vigilance and discipline, could not ensure safe passage. And so, with sails mended, spirits cautiously renewed, and the weight of experience heavy upon them, the fleet continued, each oarstroke a measure of resolve, each glance to the horizon a mixture of hope and caution, and each heart beating with the knowledge that the journey to Ithaca demanded not only courage and cunning but patience, restraint, and respect for forces both seen and unseen. The fleet, weary but vigilant, sailed onward from Aeolia, the horizon a jagged line where sky met restless sea, each wave catching the sunlight like fractured gems. The men moved with a cautious rhythm, repairing sails, checking provisions, and glancing toward distant shores with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, for the memory of the unleashed winds and the Cyclops' wrath lingered fresh in their minds. Odysseus stood at the prow, eyes sharp, scanning both sky and water, attuned to every subtle shift, every glimmer that might betray an island or danger. The land that finally emerged from the morning haze was stark and formidable. Jagged cliffs rose sharply from rocky shores, their surfaces scorched and barren, blackened streaks hinting at fire or strange minerals. The narrow beaches were lined with strange, dark shapes, and the waters near the shore were unnaturally still, as though the sea itself hesitated at this place. "Laestrygonians," Odysseus whispered, his voice low but carrying an edge of warning. "Giants of immense size and ferocity. Their hunger for flesh is legend, their strength unmatched. Approach with caution, for we sail not to trade or parley, but merely to pass, lest the dead rise in number from our pride or misjudgment." The ships dropped anchor in a small cove, the men disembarking with arms ready and senses alert, their shadows stretching long over the jagged rocks. At first, the inhabitants seemed invisible, silent, as if the island itself held its breath, waiting. Then the Laestrygonians emerged, towering figures, muscles like carved stone, eyes gleaming with a feral intelligence, and hands capable of crushing hulls and men alike. Odysseus' scouts returned with news of villages and livestock, but also of warriors hiding in the cliffs, observing, calculating, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The first encounter was sudden and terrifying. Spears as long as trees flew through the air, hurling men and splintering shields. The giants' roars shook the earth and sea alike, a cacophony that left hearts hammering and blood chilled. Odysseus moved among his men like a conductor in a storm, directing retreat, forming defensive lines, and using the narrow cove and cliffs to minimize the giants' overwhelming strength. Some ships were overturned, men thrown into the surf, the roar of the Laestrygonians echoing across the cove as they seized boats and devoured crew members with terrifying efficiency. Odysseus, assessing the growing danger, devised a desperate escape. With shouted orders, ropes, and quick thinking, he guided the remaining ships away from the shore, utilizing the narrow channel and his knowledge of wind and current to outmaneuver the giants. Arrows and javelins flew, striking a few creatures, but their blows were largely inconsequential. Survival depended on cunning, speed, and the ability to remain calm amid chaos. As the fleet pulled from the cove, the men clung to oars with grim determination, muscles straining, breath ragged, hearts pounding with terror and relief. Odysseus, standing tall at the prow of his flagship, eyes sharp and calculating, recognized the lesson in full. Power without wisdom is devastating, and vigilance is the only shield against overwhelming force. The wounded and terrified men murmured quietly, recounting the horrors they had witnessed. Yet beneath fear lingered admiration for the leader who had guided them through disaster. Each oarstroke carried them further from the island of monstrous hunger, and the cliffs of Laestrygonia receded into mist and memory, leaving behind the lingering knowledge that the world was vast, strange, and filled with dangers both seen and unseen. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the restless sea, painting the waves in gold and crimson. Odysseus' gaze swept the horizon, thoughts heavy with both gratitude and caution. For every island that promised shelter might conceal terror, for every calm sea might hide disaster, and for every victory, no matter how clever, might carry consequences beyond mortal foresight. And so, with hearts still trembling, sails mended, and oars steady, the fleet continued its voyage westward, each man aware that the journey was far from over, that the lessons of cunning, courage, and vigilance would be tested again and again, and that the legend of Odysseus would be forged not only in triumph but in survival amid the perils of a world both wondrous and deadly. The sea lay like a polished mirror beneath a pale morning sun, the horizon stretching endlessly, shimmering with possibilities both hopeful and perilous. Odysseus' fleet, battered yet resilient, pressed onward, the rhythmic splash of oars a constant heartbeat beneath the watchful sky. The men, weary from encounters with Cyclopes and Laestrygonians, moved with careful precision, tending to sails, inspecting provisions, and sharing whispered memories of home that lingered like ghosts along the deck. Odysseus stood at the prow, eyes scanning distant shapes along the horizon, noting the subtle rise of hills, the shimmer of forests, and the curling smoke of hearth fires that promised both refuge and intrigue. "There lies ahead," he said softly to his closest companions, voice carrying over the gentle wind. "Here dwells Circe, an enchantress whose wisdom and magic rival the gods. Approach with respect, for her powers are great, and curiosity unchecked may invite danger." As they neared the island, the air changed subtly, carrying scents of strange herbs, flowers, and burning incense, mingling with the salt and spray of the sea. The forested hills shimmered with a golden-green hue, sunlight glinting off leaves in patterns that seemed almost intentional, as if the island itself was aware of their arrival. Circe appeared upon a terrace of polished stone, her hair glinting like spun gold, eyes sharp and assessing, voice melodic and dangerous in its beauty. She welcomed Odysseus and his men with gestures both gracious and cryptic, offering food, drink, and hospitality. Yet her smile held the hint of secrets untold. "Strangers of the sea," she said, voice like wind through reeds. "You have journeyed far, braved monsters, storms, and men alike. Rest, eat, and know that here, for a time, danger may yield to comfort. Yet beware, for not all gifts are as they seem." The men, exhausted and hungry, were drawn to her feasts, the sweet aroma of roasted meats, spiced breads, and honeyed fruits mingling with the heady scent of herbs. One by one, they tasted the offerings, and almost immediately, a subtle enchantment took hold. Muscles slackened, minds dulled, and memories of home faded like mist at sunrise. Odysseus, wary of the signs he had long observed, kept his distance, eyes sharp, hands ready, and mind racing with strategies both diplomatic and martial. The transformation of his men struck him with both sorrow and resolve. Friends and companions were reduced to helplessness, playful in appearance yet trapped by magic. Stepping forward with measured authority, Odysseus confronted Circe directly, his voice calm yet infused with command. "Enchantress," he said, "we are weary travelers, bound for home. Harm us not, for our minds are as sharp as our swords, and our will is resolute." Circe, amused yet respectful of his presence and cunning, regarded him closely. The exchange was a delicate dance of words and intent, strategy and power, each recognizing the intelligence and cunning of the other. Ultimately, she relented, restoring Odysseus' men to awareness through a mixture of ritual and subtle magic, their eyes clearing, their senses returning with a shock of reality and relief. For a month, Odysseus and his companions remained on Earth, learning the arts of herb and craft, observing the rhythms of magic and nature, and deepening both wisdom and restraint. Circe, with rare candor, offered counsel regarding the trials ahead, Scylla and Charybdis, the Sirens, and the long voyage that would test mind, body, and spirit. She spoke of the gods' caprices, mortal vulnerability, and the necessity of cunning married to courage. Odysseus listened, absorbed, and weighed her words against both experience and instinct, understanding that the journey home demanded not only physical endurance but the sharpening of thought, the mastery of both emotion and intellect, and the ability to guide men through fear and temptation alike. The men, regaining strength and morale, shared laughter, stories, and cautious camaraderie, yet all understood the lessons of Circe. Appearances can deceive, comfort may mask peril, and survival depends upon awareness, discipline, and respect for forces greater than oneself. When the time came to depart, Circe provided gifts, counsel, and warnings, guiding them to the seas beyond air and to the next phase of the journey, a passage fraught with dangers more subtle and cunning than any previously faced. As the fleet sailed once more, the island of Ithaca fading into mist, Odysseus felt the weight of experience pressing upon him, the lessons of monsters, magic, and mortal frailty intertwining with the hope of home. Each wave, each gust of wind, and each glance toward the distant horizon reminded him that the path to Ithaca was both tangible and elusive, shaped by courage, cunning, and the unpredictable currents of both human and divine will, and that the story of his voyage would endure, shaped not only by heroic feats but by wisdom, restraint, and the mastery of both mind and heart. The fleet sailed on, the sun dipping low on the horizon and casting a molten glow across the restless waters, as Odysseus guided his men with steady hands and a mind sharpened by countless trials. Though the air was calm, a subtle tension clung to the fleet, a quiet forewarning of the challenges yet to come. Circe's counsel had been clear. Before reaching home, Odysseus must journey to the underworld, to the land of the dead, to seek wisdom from the shade of Tiresias, the blind prophet whose knowledge spanned both mortal and divine realms. The men whispered among themselves, their voices hushed and tinged with unease, as the coastline of Ithaca faded behind them and the waters grew darker, colder, and more solemn. "Prepare yourselves," Odysseus instructed, voice low but carrying an edge of authority. "This journey is unlike any before, for the dead do not move as the living. Their words may carry truth, yet their presence chills the soul and tests the heart. Courage alone will not suffice. Vigilance and respect are as vital as strength." They approached a desolate shoreline marked by barren cliffs, jagged rocks, and a low mist that clung to the sand like a shroud. The smell of brine mixed with an acrid tang of sulfur and decay, and the cries of distant birds sounded hollow and mournful. Here, Circe's instructions guided them. A pit would be dug, sacrifices offered, and the veil between worlds lifted with ritual and reverence. Odysseus and his men acted with solemnity, each movement deliberate, each gesture laden with respect for the forces beyond their comprehension. The first to appear was Elpenor, a young companion who had died unwittingly on Ithaca. His shade rose trembling from the pit, eyes wide with confusion and fear, and he begged Odysseus for proper burial rites so that his spirit might find rest. Odysseus, with calm but sorrowful hands, promised ceremony, binding Elpenor's fate to honor and respect, demonstrating to the men that even in death, the bonds of duty, friendship, and reverence endured. As night fell, the shades of the dead gathered, some whispering faint warnings, others recounting tales of heroism, folly, and regret. Odysseus called to Tiresias, offering gifts and words of reverence, and the blind prophet emerged, his presence commanding and solemn. "Odysseus of Ithaca," Tiresias intoned, voice echoing as though carried from a distant chasm. "Your path is perilous, your trials many, yet knowledge alone will guide you through storms, monsters, and the whims of gods. Beware the cattle of Helios, navigate the straits of Scylla and Charybdis with care, and trust in cunning as much as courage. The road is long, and only prudence and vigilance shall secure your return." Odysseus listened intently, absorbing every word, understanding that foresight was as critical as action, and that the choices made now would ripple through fate like stones dropped into a vast, unseen river. One by one, other shades appeared, mothers, warriors, and companions lost to battle or misfortune, each bearing lessons of mortality, consequence, and the fragile balance between ambition and hubris. They spoke of sorrow, of longing, and of the price paid for deeds done in both pride and necessity. Odysseus, patient and respectful, questioned them, learning not only of the immediate future but of human and divine patterns that would shape the remaining journey. When the time came to leave, the fleet had been instructed and the men prepared as well as fear and knowledge could allow. The rituals concluded, the sacrifices burned, and the veil between life and death closed with solemnity, leaving Odysseus with a mixture of resolve, foreknowledge, and the somber weight of mortality pressed upon his shoulders. The return to the ships was quiet, the men subdued by both awe and contemplation, aware that their leader had glimpsed truths hidden from mortal eyes and that the challenges ahead were as much tests of the mind and soul as of body and courage. As the ships drifted from the desolate shore, the wind whispered through rigging like a chorus of distant voices, carrying both the scent of salt and the haunting echo of the shades. Odysseus stood at the prow, gaze fixed on the horizon, contemplating the delicate weave of fate, divine intervention, and mortal action. The fleet sailed on, the waves rippling like molten silver beneath a high sun, each ship cutting a steady path through the endless blue. Odysseus' men, tempered by encounters with Cyclopes, Laestrygonians, and the haunting lessons of the underworld, moved with deliberate care, their hands sure on oars and rigging, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Yet a subtle tension lingered in the air, the quiet awareness that the sea held perils not always visible, trials that did not strike with brute force but with the insidious allure of temptation. Circe's counsel weighed heavily on Odysseus' mind as they approached a narrow strait flanked by jagged cliffs. "The sirens sing," he reminded his men, "and their voices carry a sweetness that ensnares the mind. Sail close, but yield not to curiosity, for those who listen lose themselves, abandoning reason and duty for a fleeting pleasure that ends in ruin." The first sight of the sirens was deceptively serene, cliffs rising like jagged teeth above a glassy channel, the distant shimmer of their rocky shores alive with strange birds and the faint, almost imperceptible ripple of movement. Then came the song, soft at first, weaving through the air like a ribbon of music, delicate and intoxicating, carrying words that promised knowledge, secrets of the past and future, glory, and the comforts of home. The crew stiffened at the sound, their oars trembling in their hands as the melody threaded through their minds, tugging at memory and desire. Odysseus, aware of both danger and opportunity, instructed the men to plug their ears with beeswax, pressing the warm, fragrant wax into their ears until the sirens' voices became a distant hum. But for himself, curious and cunning, he had himself lashed to the mast, that he might hear without surrendering to the spell. The moment was electric. The song wrapped around his mind, urging, coaxing, offering visions of home, glory, and the ultimate understanding of mortal and divine mysteries. Odysseus' heart raced as desire and restraint warred within him, the tension sharpened by his foresight, discipline, and the knowledge that yielding would doom not only him but all who trusted him. From the decks, the crew strained against the current, their hands steady on oars, faces pale but determined, muscles taut, following the rhythm of their leader's command. The ships moved through the strait with deliberate precision, ropes creaking, sails taut, and the siren's song rising like a tide only to be resisted by the unity and vigilance of disciplined men. Odysseus, suspended between curiosity and duty, felt the delicate line of control strain with every note. The visions offered glimpses of all he sought, wisdom, recognition, the very secrets of the world, but he remained bound, conscious that indulgence would mean ruin. Hours passed, though they seemed like moments, and gradually the voices faded, the cliffs receding, the music dissolving into the natural sounds of sea and wind. The men, hands sore but steady, exchanged glances of relief, their hearts pounding with the exhilaration of survival and the knowledge that they had resisted an unseen but potent force. Odysseus, finally freed from his bonds, felt the weight of both satisfaction and lingering curiosity, the siren's melody leaving traces of thought and memory that would haunt dreams and reflection for years to come. The lesson was indelible. Temptation can be more dangerous than brute force, knowledge can ensnare as easily as ignorance, and leadership demands both courage and restraint. The fleet pressed on, each wave carrying them further from the deadly lure of the sirens, and the men, tempered by trials both physical and mental, moved with renewed vigilance. The horizon stretched ahead, endless and shimmering, promising both new wonders and inevitable dangers, and Odysseus, standing at the prow, contemplated the delicate balance of desire, discipline, and foresight that would continue to shape their perilous journey home. The sun scorched the waves like molten gold, and Odysseus' fleet approached an island where the light seemed almost sacred, gilding cliffs and verdant pastures with a divine glow. This was Thrinacia, the domain of Helios, god of the sun, whose sacred cattle grazed peacefully under watchful eyes. Circe's warnings rang clear in Odysseus' mind. None were to harm the cattle, for to do so would invoke a wrath so terrible that even Odysseus' cunning might not save them. Hunger gnawed at the men, a relentless companion that had been both their motivation and their danger throughout the journey. Each man wrestled privately with restraint and desire, aware that a single misstep could undo everything achieved through storms, monsters, and cunning. Despite Odysseus' strict orders, the men's temptation proved too strong after weeks at sea. Led by Eurylochus, they slaughtered the cattle while Odysseus prayed and slept, unaware of the impending doom. The sky darkened as Helios' wrath rose like a tempest, thunder rolling across the sea as waves tossed the ships violently. Lightning flashed, and a storm the likes of which none had seen tore the fleet apart. Men cried, oars splintered, and the smell of salt and burning hair mingled with grief. Only Odysseus' ship survived, carrying him alone on a raft of driftwood, the vast ocean swallowing the screams of his companions. He clung to life, sorrow gnawing at his heart, the lesson etched in the bitterest terms. Mortal greed cannot defy divine law, and even the cleverest leader cannot fully shield those who choose folly. Days and nights blurred into one another as Odysseus drifted, battered by waves, scorched by the sun, and chilled by relentless winds. His mind roamed between despair and determination, imagining the fate of his lost men, recalling the lessons of monsters and gods alike, and remembering Penelope and Ithaca. Hunger, thirst, and fatigue became constant companions, yet he never surrendered to despair. He fashioned rudimentary sails from torn cloth, rigged oars from debris, and kept a vigilant eye on the horizon, always seeking a sign of land, a glimmer of hope. In his solitude, he reflected on each trial endured: the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, Circe, the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, and each mistake, each victory, had sharpened his mind, tempered his courage, and deepened his resolve. Night brought visions, ghosts of fallen comrades, whispers of the gods, and fleeting images of Ithaca, all mingling in dreams that were half memory, half prophecy. Odysseus learned the cruel rhythm of the sea as a teacher, its lessons bitter but precise, preparing him for the final stages of his journey. After days adrift, Odysseus washed ashore on the island of Ogygia, a paradise lush with forests, fruit-laden trees, and sparkling streams. There he met Calypso, a nymph of extraordinary beauty and power, who welcomed him with gentle laughter and whispered promises of immortality should he stay. For 7 years, Odysseus lived on Ogygia, torn between comfort, desire, and the call of home. Calypso's love was a seductive force, but he never forgot Ithaca, Penelope, or the men he had lost. Days were spent in conversation, song, and the rhythm of domestic peace, yet nights were filled with longing and dreams of home. Finally, the gods intervened. Athena appealed to Zeus, who commanded that Calypso release Odysseus. Though sorrowful, she obeyed, providing him with materials to build a raft. Once more he set sail, heart heavy yet renewed with the hope of finally reaching Ithaca. Odysseus drifted once more, eventually landing exhausted on the shores of Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. Here he was found by Nausicaa, the king's daughter, whose kindness and courage brought him to the court of King Alcinous. The Phaeacians, masters of navigation and hospitality, received Odysseus with generosity and curiosity. He recounted the tale of his journey, from Troy to the islands of monsters, gods, and magic, describing every peril, loss, and narrow escape. The court listened in rapt attention, their admiration growing with each chapter of the tale. Moved by his story, Alcinous provided ships, provisions, and skilled sailors to finally carry Odysseus home. He set sail once more, guided by the wisdom of those who had perfected the sea, and with every wave, Ithaca grew closer, the promise of reunion with Penelope tangible as never before. Odysseus arrived at Ithaca under cover of night, landing on a shore he had long dreamed of but feared would be forever lost to him. Disguised by Athena as a beggar, he moved cautiously, assessing the state of his palace, the suitors who had overrun his home, and the loyalty of servants who remained faithful. Each step required cunning, patience, and careful observation. He learned their habits, their numbers, and the strength of their arrogance. Even in familiar lands, Odysseus realized that the greatest challenges were not monsters or storms, but deception, pride, and the restoration of justice within human hearts. He met Telemachus in secret, their reunion tinged with tears, laughter, and strategy, as father and son prepared to reclaim the palace from those who had defiled it. Odysseus executed his plan with precision, blending stealth, strategy, and sheer force of will. The suitors, confident and arrogant, were caught off guard, and one by one, they fell to Odysseus' arrows and cunning. The loyal servants and allies aided in the final victory, restoring order, honor, and the balance of the household. At last, Odysseus revealed himself to Penelope, whose cautious recognition turned to overwhelming relief and joy. The reunion was both tender and triumphant, a culmination of years of endurance, cunning, and the unwavering pursuit of home. Ithaca, battered but intact, welcomed its king, and the legend of Odysseus, of storms survived, monsters defeated, and the ceaseless drive of the human spirit, was etched into the memory of all who heard his tale. Yet even in this final chapter, the lessons endured: vigilance, courage, cunning, and restraint, woven together like the threads of a tapestry, had carried a mortal through the caprices of gods, the perils of sea and land, and the tests of both mind and heart. The halls of Ithaca were silent now, save for the gentle crackle of firelight and the distant murmur of the sea beyond the cliffs. The scent of spilt wine and the metallic tang of blood still lingered in the air, mingling with the perfume of freshly lit incense as servants scrubbed the marble floors. Odysseus stood in the courtyard beneath a starlit sky, the constellations shining with the same cold brilliance they had on the nights he had been lost at sea. The bow was no longer in his hands, yet its weight seemed etched into his muscles, as though the act of reclaiming his home had left a mark that could not be erased. Penelope moved beside him, silent for a long while, her hand brushing against his as if testing the reality of his return. Telemachus had gone to rest, the young man now carrying himself with the quiet confidence of one who had stood shoulder to shoulder with his father in battle. Outside the palace walls, the land awaited its king's justice. Families of the slain suitors would soon come demanding blood for blood, and though the gods had favored him in his trials, Odysseus knew that mortal feuds were not so easily calmed. He felt the restless pull of the sea even here, as though Poseidon's waves whispered that his trials were not yet truly done. But for this night, there was peace. The flicker of lamplight on Penelope's face was enough to still the weight of years, and the warm wind that drifted in from the olive groves carried no omen of storm. Odysseus leaned back, the stone of the courtyard cool against his shoulders, and allowed himself one unguarded breath, a deep inhalation of hearth smoke, salt air, and the faint scent of Penelope's hair. Tomorrow would bring disputes, alliances, and the delicate mending of a kingdom's fractured trust. But tonight, Ithaca was whole again, and the long echo of his journey, like the receding tide, began to fade into memory. Dawn came slow to Ithaca, spilling gold across the harbor and painting the palace walls in the pale light of a new day. The olive trees shimmered faintly in the breeze, their leaves flashing silver like tiny mirrors catching the sun. But beneath that calm, the island was not yet at rest. From the hills and the villages came the muted sound of footsteps and murmurs, men gathering, voices hushed, the scrape of spearheads against stone. The kin of the slain suitors had risen before the sun, their grief sharpening into rage. They came not as an unruly mob but as men bound together by blood and vengeance, their eyes hard with the certainty that justice must be repaid in kind. Within the palace courtyard, Odysseus stood fully armed, bronze greaves gleaming, his breastplate etched with the scars of many battles. Telemachus was beside him, youthful yet unflinching, the sunlight glinting off his spear. Loyal Eumaeus and Philoetius tightened the leather straps of their armor, glancing toward the main road that wound upward from the harbor. The quiet tension was broken only by the caw of a raven overhead, a single, black-winged cry that echoed across the stones like a dark prophecy. Soon they appeared, the avengers, a wave of grim faces and steel-tipped weapons, fanning out across the slope before the palace gates. The leader, Eupeithes, father of Antinous, stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of sorrow and fury. "You have spilled the blood of our sons, Odysseus, king though you are. The gods may favor you, but we will not let the earth drink their blood unanswered." Odysseus raised his spear in silent challenge, but before the first blow could be struck, the air shimmered like heat over stone. A brilliant figure descended upon the scene, Athena herself, her eyes blazing as though each contained a fragment of the sun. She stood between the two sides, her spear planted firmly in the earth, and her voice, when it came, was like a sudden thunderclap over a still sea. "Enough," she commanded, her gaze sweeping across the warriors. "The bloodshed is ended. Lay down your arms, and let peace bind this land once more." or face the wrath of the gods, and see your houses fall to ash. The tension hung like a drawn bow, every man holding his breath, until Eupeithes, his jaw trembling, let his spear clatter to the ground. One by one, the others followed, the clash of bronze on stone ringing out in reluctant surrender. Athena turned to Odysseus, her expression softer now, though still tinged with the unyielding power of Olympus. You have suffered long, son of Laertes. Now let the home you fought for stand unshaken. And as swiftly as she had come, she was gone, leaving only the rustle of olive leaves and the slow, collective exhale of men stepping back from the brink. Odysseus lowered his spear, the weight of years seeming to slip from his shoulders. Telemachus stood at his side, silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if seeing, for the first time, an Ithaca truly at peace. Years slipped by like water over smooth stones, and Ithaca breathed again under the steady hand of its king. The palace, once echoing with the chaos of the suitors, now rang with the voices of children, the laughter of feasts, and the songs of bards who told not only of Troy but of the long and winding road home. The olive groves flourished, their twisted trunks heavy with fruit, and the goats wandered freely over the sunlit hills. Odysseus walked often among them, no longer in armor, but in a simple cloak, leaning on a polished ash staff. His hair, once black as night, had taken on the silver sheen of winter frost, and his eyes, still sharp, carried the depth of storms long past. Yet the sea never truly released him. Sometimes at dusk, when the sun melted into the horizon, he would stand on the cliff's edge and watch the waves curl and break, feeling in their rhythm the heartbeat of an old friend and enemy both. It was during such evenings that he recalled the prophecy of Tiresias, spoken in the shadowed halls of the underworld, that he would journey once more, carrying an oar upon his shoulder, until he found a land where no man knew the taste of salt or the sight of the sea. Only then would he plant the oar in the earth and offer sacrifice to Poseidon, after which a peaceful death, far from the foam, would come to him. In time, the restlessness grew. One morning, before dawn, Odysseus wrapped himself in his cloak, took the oar from the boathouse where it had hung for years, and began walking inland. Telemachus watched from the palace steps but did not call out. He understood that this was not a departure born of duty or war, but of destiny. For many days Odysseus wandered, the air growing thick with the sense of earth and wheat instead of brine. At last, he came to a small village far from the reach of tides. The people there stared curiously at the oar upon his shoulder, mistaking it for some strange, broad-bladed winnowing fan. Smiling, Odysseus knew he had come to the place foretold. He planted the oar in the soft soil, poured out libations to the god who had once sought to break him, and spoke words that were neither prayer nor defiance, but something in between. Afterward, he returned to Ithaca, the last pull of the sea quiet in his heart. There, in the twilight of his years, he sat beside Penelope beneath the olive tree in the courtyard, the same tree around which their marriage bed had been built. The air was warm, heavy with the hum of cicadas, and the stars came out one by one, like the lights of distant ships on a darkened sea. When the end came, it was gentle, like slipping into a calm harbor after a long voyage. And if there was a wind that carried him away, it smelled of both salt and earth, as if the sea and the land had finally agreed to let him rest. Long after Odysseus had passed into the realm where mortals no longer walk, his name remained alive in the voices of Ithaca. The bards still came to the palace, carrying lyres strung with gut and hearts full of tales, their fingers dancing over the strings as they wove the great tapestry of his life. Children gathered in the firelight, eyes wide, some hardly believing that a man could blind a Cyclops, outwit a sorceress, and face the wrath of the sea god himself. Yet for the elders, those who had seen him stride through the palace doors in the rags of a beggar only to stand revealed as their king, the stories were not just legend, they were memory. The olive tree in the courtyard, the one rooted deep into the bedrock, spread its branches wider each year, sheltering those who sat beneath it. Penelope, now grey and dignified as the dawn, would sit there with her spindle, her fingers working as they always had, the soft whir of wool the counterpoint to the bard's music. She spoke little of her husband in public, yet in the quiet of the night, she would sometimes rest her hand on the polished wood of the marriage bed and feel as though the warmth of his presence still lingered there. Telemachus, now king in truth, ruled with a mind tempered by both his father's cunning and his mother's patience. His reign brought Ithaca a rare balance, firm in defense, wise in trade, generous to friends, and cautious with strangers. Yet even he, at times, would walk to the cliffs at sunset and stand looking toward the horizon, wondering whether his father had truly finished all his voyages or if, somewhere beyond the world men knew, another Odysseian journey was still unfolding. The sea itself seemed to remember him. On certain nights when the wind shifted just so, the waves would take on a strange rhythm, not unlike the cadence of a rowing crew. Fishermen swore they could hear, far beyond the breakers, the faint creak of oarlocks and the low hum of a sailor's tune. And perhaps, in some place where gods and mortals meet, Odysseus still sailed, a shadow against the eternal sky, steering toward a shore he alone could see. The years rolled over Ithaca like the slow turning of the tide, wearing away sharp edges and filling the kingdom with a peace its people had almost forgotten could exist. The palace walls, once echoing with the clash of bronze and the cries of vengeance, now hummed softly with the laughter of children and the steady rhythm of daily life. The olive groves thickened, their silver-green leaves whispering in the sea breeze, and the harbors grew busy again as traders returned with holds full of amber, grain, and bright woven cloth. Penelope's hair turned the color of sea foam under moonlight, and though her body slowed, her eyes remained as keen as the day she first tested her suitors with the bow. She walked the halls quietly now, her hands trailing over the carved lintels and stone pillars, as though touching them anchored the memories of 1,000 days and nights spent waiting, watching, and weaving. Telemachus grew into a king who no longer needed to prove himself. He ruled with the balance of a seasoned mariner, steering his people between the rocks of pride and the whirlpools of fear. His fleet was modest, his soldiers loyal, and his counselors wise. But on certain evenings, when the western sky blazed gold and crimson over the dark sea, he would leave the council hall and stand alone at the cliffs, feeling the salt spray on his face, his heart heavy with an ache he could not name. Some nights, when the moon was bright and the sea was calm, fishermen returning late swore they saw a shadowed hull slipping just beyond the horizon, too swift for any mortal ship. They told each other, over cups of wine and the glow of lanterns, that it was Odysseus himself, still sailing the wide world in some secret errand of the gods. They said he came back to Ithaca now and then, unseen, to walk the beaches barefoot and listen to the surf before vanishing again into the deep. Athena's shrine atop the hill still drew offerings of oil, honey, and fresh flowers. Those who prayed there spoke of dreams in which the goddess appeared, her grey eyes shining like dawn on the water, her voice carrying the faintest smile when she spoke of the man she had once guided. Poseidon, for his part, remained silent, though the storms that lashed Ithaca's coast grew fewer and less fierce, as if the god's anger had finally ebbed into something like respect. Time softened the edges of the old songs, turning the hard notes of vengeance into the flowing lines of adventure. The bards still came in spring, their cloaks heavy with road dust, their fingers deft upon the strings of lyres as they told of the boy who became a king, the king who became a wanderer, and the wanderer who found his way home. In the quiet corners of the palace, the scent of olive wood and wool still lingered, and if one passed the great bedchamber at night, the marriage bed carved into the living tree still seemed to hold the warmth of two lives bound together by trials and time. And so Ithaca endured, balanced between sea and sky, memory and the living present. The waves came and went, the stars turned slowly overhead, and somewhere far beyond the sight of men, the great mariner of the age may still have been steering by their light, forever chasing the horizon, forever part of the song that the sea will never let die.